last few years, we have seen massive change. There was a period of time from the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 until the first Trump administration in 2017, and particularly until COVID in 2020. The world was governed by a series of understanding which most people accept. For instance, they thought about just in time. And the world was relying on China as the factory and everywhere else as financial center. Things were moving by container boxes, and people think that that was the world order. But today, as you know, from just in time, we are now talking about just in case. Right? From chasing for efficiency, chasing for cheapest location to produce, chasing for cheapest sources. Today, companies, especially multinational, each of them has a chief risk officer. Everyone is looking at how to de-risk. To understand what is de-risking, it means don't put all the eggs in one basket. And somehow Malaysia now has an opportunity for a second takeoff, in part because many manufacturers, global manufacturers, because of geopolitical tension between US and China, and also because of the experience in COVID, as well as the crisis in Red Sea and other crises that disrupted logistics. Companies are now looking at Malaysia as not the China basket. So we have an opportunity because manufacturers, global manufacturers now decided that they do not want to put all the manufacturing basket or manufacturing eggs in one China basket. So we have an opportunity. But this opportunity should be seized upon by Malaysians in a deeper way. Where do we want to go? We want to see Malaysia in a decade time. That Malaysia will occupy an indispensable middle in the supply chain. We acknowledge that in 10 years' time, we will not be able to reach the level of technological sophistication like the United States, like China today, like Japan, Korea, or Taiwan. But we want to occupy a space just below US, China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. We want to occupy that space as an indispensable middle in the supply chain. And I think that is possible. If some of you have visited some of the semiconductor-related companies in Penang, you would know that in terms of technological sophistication, we are very interesting. So for REHDA, it will be interesting that the REHDA Institute can organize, apart from visiting Melbourne, which I acknowledge was a good trip, it would be interesting to visit, to have a 3-day tour of the semiconductor companies in Penang and Kulim to understand the technological potential of Malaysia. If you need any help, my ministry can help to organize. Because I've been taking tours. Last year I took a group of GLICs, leaders including Kazana CEO and quite a few of them, to visit the semiconductor sector, and they spent 3 days, a group of GLIC CEOs. They spent 3 days in the semiconductor industry and they were impressed. They came away with this feeling that why the GLICs in Malaysia have not discovered the semiconductor industry in Malaysia in the last 15 years apart from Silterra. So I think this is an opportunity for all of you to think about. But as I say, the world is in a crisis mood, and the world is in a permanent crisis mood. What are the crises we are dealing with? Number one, we dealt with COVID, but there will be a lot more health-related crises that are emerging, including aging and depopulation or shrinking of population around the world except in Africa. So everywhere around the world, except in fact Africa, is going to face depopulation and aging population together at once. And that is a challenge that we will have to deal with. We will have to deal with a lot more geopolitical tension and wars. We have seen a war on European continent, the Ukraine war. We have seen the Middle East burning. We are dealing with multiple geopolitical tension in our part of the world, in the form of the crisis or tension in the Korean Peninsula, in the Taiwan Strait, and in the South China Sea. We are going to see a lot more financial instability, interest rate, debt crisis in the developing countries, and financial insecurity is causing populism in advanced countries. You see populism, right-wing populism happening in the United States, in European countries, in many ways because of financial and economic insecurity. And as you watch the TV over the last 2 weeks, you realize that climate change is in your face. The LA fire and many other challenges. And these four crises: health, geopolitics, financial instability, and the climate crisis is not going to end in the next 5 years or the next 10 years. And these are the things that we have to grapple with. I saw a sign saying 5 minutes left. Unfortunately, I have just started. I have 5 points to share with Malaysian developers. Moving to a world that as we described, I think so I have described the positive potential of Malaysia and the difficult world that we have to navigate. The 5 points I want to share with real estate developers in Malaysia. The first point is, if we take into consideration the crisis I mentioned, particularly the climate crisis, one of the very important points that I hope we can really think about in the years to come, that is to end sprawling and bring people back to inner city, particularly in the case of Kuala Lumpur. Since the successful development of Subang Jaya in the 1970s, I actually stay in Subang Jaya. Since the successful development of Subang Jaya, Malaysia has become the champion, or we have ingrained in our development mindset of turning plantation estate into housing estate. And of course, many people make money in the last 50 years. Many of you here became very rich because of turning plantation estate into housing estate. But also, state government, local authorities, everyone make money out of turning plantation estate into housing estate. But I think it is time for us to reverse the trend. Think about this. When you sprawl the city, the cost of infrastructure, the cost of water, electricity, internet line that we have to put in, the cost of transportation, particularly now we are in a state where the government knows that at some point we have to remove petrol subsidy. However, because we have adopted an American lifestyle. What is an American lifestyle? We became American before we got rich. We built the highways and everyone has a car. So this American lifestyle, that everyone owns a car without being rich, is now causing a serious fiscal challenge to the country. So difficult, very difficult political challenges. But in moving into the future, I think the developers, the real estate players can play a role in ending sprawling and bringing life back into the inner city. And as I mentioned, I know that you went to Melbourne, and I know many Malaysian developers make money out of Melbourne. Melbourne is a case in point. Back in the 80s, Melbourne was hollowing out. But from the 90s onwards, with RMIT, with universities, with a lot more Asians moving into Melbourne, inner city, and with the kids, the children of those who have moved out to the suburb, their children come back to live in inner city. Today, if you go to Melbourne, the Melbourne inner city is thriving. Thriving with cafe, thriving with public transport, thriving with life. And I think Kuala Lumpur has that opportunity. Kuala Lumpur has that opportunity to actually reverse the trend of people hollowing out and now coming back in. We have now 118, we have TRX, BBCC, from KLCC to Dataran. That's small areas of 5 square kilometers. If we can imagine that space and bring housing into it, bring some rental housing into it, bring regional headquarters into it, I think it will be very interesting. In my position as Deputy Media Minister, I meet many foreign investors, and I tell them, I say, you just read Knight Frank's report. Knight Frank report say that CBD KL, what they call rental in CBD KL is 15% of Singapore CBD. So you just have to imagine that Kuala Lumpur is the Singapore at a discount. You'll make all the right decisions. The second point I want to make is that much as most of you make money out of selling houses to individuals, it's time for us to imagine that not everyone needs to own a house. There are multiple models. For example, REITs. How do we create rental housing for the young generation in inner city, retrofitting old buildings, and get REITs to pay for it and go into a different model? It is very interesting that EPF and other cliques own assets overseas, particularly in European cities. Owning rental housing estates or investing in rental housing assets overseas. But in Malaysia, we do not have asset class that are in that category. So it is time for us, when we think about reimagining Kuala Lumpur and other cities, it is very important for us to also think of not necessarily building to sell, but building to rent as well. I saw that there is one session in the afternoon to talk about BTR in Australia. I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from a different ownership model. And think about this. Every time I say this, someone says, oh, we Asian, ownership is in our DNA in the last 2,000 years. Wrong. In Malaysia, before 1980, in 1980, only 35% Malaysians live in urban areas. Those who live in rural areas do not spend 30 years of paying mortgages to own a house. And those in the urban centers, my father used to rent a room in Petaling streets with 6 young men. This was 60 years ago. With 6 young men crammed in a room, and that shop lot has 20 rooms in Petaling streets. Actually, those sort of shops has zero carbon footprint, because you stay upstairs, you work downstairs. But the point is that, ownership is new in this country. It's not more than 60 years. Third point I would like to make is that the revival of secondary cities is something to look forward to, especially in real connected cities, such as Kluang, Taiping, and now with ECRL. There are potentials on the East Coast. I say this partly because I spent half a month in September last year in Kluang, which a constituency that I represented between 2013 and 2018. I spent half a month there because I was campaigning for the Makota by-election. But I start to feel that there will be new lease of life for Kluang and for many other cities, especially when the Germas Johor Bahru line is completed. And the Transport Minister, Anthony Loke, has also announced that once the Germas Johor Bahru line is completed, the government will also invest in a commuter line from Johor Bahru to Kluang. Now, all this ECRL and all other rail-related initiatives will probably bring life into inner city of the secondary city. Right? Even in the small town, we have explored the cities, we built taman, people no longer stay in the old inner city. But I can see that in the years to come, one of the aspects of growing secondary city is really reimagining the old inner city, particularly in towns that are connected to a new set of railway, what they call the infrastructure. And this is important. Sultan Nasrin Shah, the Perak Sultan, published a new book in 2024 called Globalization. For those who have not read it, I recommend that you read it, and especially for those who are from Perak, please read it. It's a wonderful book, and in that particular book, Sultan Nasrin lamented that Perak faced a relative decline in Malaysia's absolute prosperity. Malaysia has become so rich compared to 50 years ago, but Perak faced a relative decline. And he lamented that and pointed out that there is a need for the federal government and for everyone in the country to see that the state and the secondary cities will need a new way of life. I want to bring a bit of politics to explain why this is important. For the longest of time, Malaysia was run by a centralized national party and to a certain extent authoritarian in nature and controlling from national capital with absolute control over parliament. But we have now moved into a democracy where the states will have a lot more say because there's no more one single party ruling from the capital. Moving forward, I see this as a positive development. I see this as a positive development because, again, if you use the Australian analogy, think about Sarawak as Western Australia. Western Australia is the capital for mining and resource-based industry. Rio Tinto has their HQ in Perth. Many of the mining companies have their HQ in Perth. So think about Sarawak as the mining and resource capital. Think of Southern Johor or Johor Special Economic Zone, Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone as the Melbourne or Busan to Korea or Osaka to Japan. Think about them as the second economic capital. Think of Southern Johor as the second economic capital. Think of Penang and Kulim as the technology capital. And think of the revival of KL. So if this country is run by 4 or 5 regional engines, this will be a very prosperous nation. And we need a new mindset. The developers can play a role. The fourth point I want to make is about industrial park. I know that many of you are making money out of building industrial park and selling industrial land. I hope you take this opportunity of Malaysia's second takeoff by thinking about building supply chain. That means don't just think about selling industrial land to anyone. Think about how to build lasting supply chain in your industrial park and together with other industries. Take a bit of interest into understanding the companies, the factories that you are bringing into your industrial park. Because Malaysia is not going to just prosper by you selling industrial land. Malaysia is now being seen as an important industrial hub so that companies can diversify their risks, in part because Malaysia has very strong semiconductor supply chain in Penang and Kulim. It is not because we have a lot of land to sell. It is because we have very strong supply chain. And we want to strengthen that supply chain. We want to strengthen that supply chain. We would like developers to come on board. Do not see yourself as selling land, but to see yourself as building supply chain. And that you will be in line and you will contribute to the second economic takeoff, particularly in building very strong supply chain, making Malaysia's supply chain indispensable. I also mentioned about when it comes to industrial park, one of my argument with people is say, now we have accepted that we can build housing for foreign workers in industrial park, right? We can build housing for foreign workers in industrial park. Previously, our planning ethos is that where residence is residence, where what they call industrial is industrial. Now we accept that we can build housing for foreign workers inside industrial park. Why can't we just take a leap to think about why don't we build housing in industrial park for young engineers? Why don't we build for Malaysian workers? Now, why I say so? Think about this. Between Malaysia and Singapore, why do people work in Singapore? Not because anything else, but because Singapore pay better and because Malaysian employers are only prepared to pay 1/3 of Singapore pay. Today, you ask a young engineer if they are paid 2/3 of Singapore pay in Malaysia, will they choose Malaysia or Singapore? As long as they do not have kids in Singapore, studying in Singapore, or they are not married to Singaporeans, there's a high chance they will choose Malaysia. But how to go from 1/3 of Singapore pay to 2/3 of Singapore pay? The industrial park, housing, all this play a role. If a company can pay 50% of Singapore pay to a young engineer, but provide them with almost free housing in the industrial park, think about housing being the biggest cost of working in Singapore. They may choose working in Malaysia just with 50% of Singapore pay. But this is where the developers, particularly the industrial park players, can play a role in contributing to retaining more Malaysians in working in Malaysia, contributing to Malaysia's economic rise. Finally, my fifth point is this. My fifth point is you play a major role in building communities. Not just building houses, not just building buildings, you play a big role in building communities. In the era of talking about ESG, and we are no longer just talking about shareholder values like what espoused by Milton Friedman, we are now talking about stakeholder values and stakeholder economy. I hope real estate developers see their role as nation builders with a mission to build communities. I hope the real estate developers will think about this. Whenever you build, you think about how to create better jobs for Malaysians. Time to phase out unskilled foreign labor. Time to use more IBS. Time to tell everyone that the developers in Malaysia pay Malaysians well. Right? ESG, when everyone talks about ESG, when they talk about the S, they don't know what is the S. They say CSR. The S is about paying workers better and paying Malaysian workers better. Then we must take into consideration that whenever we build, we have to start thinking about us having to deal with an aging population. How can developers contribute to creating communities that will help Malaysians to live healthy and age gracefully and with dignity? And how do we help women to get into workforce and stay in the workforce for the longest of time? Can we design in that way to think about that? Can we design and build to think about ensuring that we don't consume so much air conditions and take care of emissions and climate? Can we build that into the design? Can we build that into Malaysian DNA, that we will build buildings that don't consume so much energy, will build buildings that will actually take all this into consideration? So I hope I don't bore you with too much challenges. I know people don't like challenges. But in closing, I believe that the Malaysian government and the private sector, particularly the property developer, should work together hand in hand to create a strong economy, a stronger economy, and to create this second takeoff for Malaysians to thrive, for Malaysians to feel dignified, and for Malaysia to feel hopeful in the years to come. Thank you very much.